how this club is doing, and in a lot of ways it's sort of like that informal report card, if you will. But certainly excited about what this team looks like, and really feel like it's going to be a competitive year for us, and hopefully the decisions we've made over this past 4 or 5 months leads us to a successful path this year. But I think one of the things we're most excited about is the depth that we've been able to create. I think we talk a lot about being able to endure injuries and get us over the hump, and allow us to try to have internal solutions versus external. And it's early. We'll certainly find out if we're deep enough for this long run. But candidly, we feel pretty good about where we're at. So I think a day like today is always sort of the most fun to be able to take your questions and give you guys a little bit of insight on how we think about answering those. So fire away.
What's up with Wayno?
Obviously, that just got announced about an hour ago, but he's dealing with a little bit of elbow discomfort. Probably could have pitched through it, but I think when you have an injury that happens in April, you got to be thinking about the long view. And going back to sort of that depth topic, giving the success you're seeing down there in Memphis, I think we feel pretty confident that we have somebody that can step in and give us a quality start, perhaps maybe 2 before Wainwright returns. But I think the one thing about taking advantage of that 10-day DL is just know that it's not the 15 anymore. And so being reactionary to that and trying to protect the players, it's a lot easier to do now than in the past when you used to have to sort of have that hard decision if you want to wait 5 or 6 days before you make the decision. Yes, sir.
Dathan Brooks, birdpoop.com.
Clever.
How do you feel about shortening the season from 162 to something like 154 to accommodate Anthony Rizzo?
I have thought about this, not because of Mr. Rizzo's comments, but just in general. The game was once played at 154. I do feel like the season continues to just get longer, and what I mean by that is, I feel like when you report early in April or early in February, season ends perhaps for a successful club as late as early November. It's tough on the body, and I think when you're looking at this from a fatigue standpoint, a standpoint of trying to keep the athlete most healthy, I'm wondering if there's some trade-off that might make more sense. So I would be someone that would consider what a shorter season might look like. I don't think you'll see anything ever below 154, and I think a lot of people are against it just because of the revenue factor. And so, Bill and I have discussed this in the past, and I think we would both be interested in seeing what that would look like, but I would not anticipate any changes anytime soon. Yes, sir.
Rohan Gupta, Cardinals Bloggers. What do you view as the plan for Carson Kelly, given that Yadier Molina is still a productive player every day?
Productive player, I'd say an elite player at the moment. But when you ask about Carson Kelly, I think the key thing for him is exactly what we decided to do, is make him play every day. And I think for him it's evolving as a hitter. There's no doubt last year when we brought him up to the big leagues that you saw him take a step backwards that way, and so now he just needs to find where he once was and get back to that level. In terms of the depth that we've been able to create at catcher, given the extension of Yadi, clearly with Carson Kelly, but also with Kinsner, and seeing the success he's having at Double-A, all of a sudden, we have maybe some options on what we could possibly do there down the road.
Well, besides the player acquisition, obviously the big news of the offseason was the changing in the coaching staff. Early returns still, but what have you seen that impressed you, and what have you seen that maybe is not what you expected?
Well, it'd be awkward for me to tell you if there was something that I thought wasn't happening with the coaching staff, given that kind of helped make those changes. But more to the point, I think when you look at bringing Okendo back, getting Willie McGee at the major league level, and then making a switch with the pitching coach, Mike Maddox, and then bringing promoting Eversgerd up to the bullpen. I mean, all of those had a reason to do that. And, I think last year when we were sitting here talking, there was a lot of narratives on base running, a lot of narratives on poor defense. I think certainly we've taken a step forward in those regards. I've never tried to put too much pressure on the coaching staff to make it seem like that's the end-all be-all when you think about trying to solve those problems. At some point you've got to play, and you have to have players do do well. But as I look at spring training, and I think that's sort of a pretty fair proxy on how you think about coaching, I do feel like the energy and what you're seeing actually worked on was something that was very positive. And so, I certainly applaud what Mike Matheny and his staff were able to do in those 6 weeks. And I feel like, when we've transitioned into the season, it's been very seamless and still very productive. So certainly feel like the coaches have made a very positive impact on this club. Yes, sir.
Going off that last question, when you brought in Mike Maddox as your pitching coach, you stressed analytics when it comes to in-game strategy. So with all this information data teams have available now, how is your staff using it? And early returns on this year, how would you grade the way they have used all that information?
Well, I certainly think our coaching staff has welcomed the analytical side. I feel like especially to kind of this room in general, when we talk about analytics versus maybe more traditional baseball nuances, that we all sort of gravitate more towards one versus the other. And I think that the one thing all of you have to realize is when you're thinking about coaching and managing a major league club, it's part art, part science. There's not one single way to do that. And why is that? Imagine that you're running a team, and I think a lot of people in this room, they get behind their keyboard or microphone and they have a very strong opinion on why. But there's a lot of things that go on in that clubhouse or in that dugout that you don't know, you don't have access to. And I feel like, Mike gets beat up a lot because of the decisions he makes. And let's just go to yesterday, for example. Obviously, Tyler Lyons being left in there or not. There's no doubt there's a fork in the road. And whatever side you go on, and it's random, right? Statistically, he did the right thing. He left the left-hander in to face 3 out of the 4 left-handers. But what happened? Got none of them out. Now, analytically, it would have said that was the right decision. Now, from the art part of it, it wasn't. And clearly, I think, Mike, gets beat up on that. At some level, a player has to execute, right? Now, if we don't have the right players executing, then that falls on the front office and failure to give him the right tools to be successful. But I sort of rambled on this question. The point here is that it's a lot harder than people think, and it's not simply just by, playing blackjack and trying to play your best odds. We've encouraged both Mike and all the coaches to understand that playing your best odds in the end will give you the most positive outcome, but there are some things that just can't get factored into that algorithm on trying to understand who can go that day, who can't, who's fresh, who's not, who's feeling a little down, who's not. And so all of that's not public information, and therefore, all of us downstairs are sort of left with, trying to give yourself the best odds based on what we know. Yes, sir.
Stephen McNeil, STL Hattrick. What do you think the player reaction is to MLB's place of play initiatives?
Well, I do think there's a little bit of tension between MLB and Players Association, but I will say, when you're down in the clubhouse or down on the field and you're talking to players about these topics, it's a little bit less like drawing a line in the sand than maybe public appearance. I feel like, players get it. Players also don't want to play in 3.5-hour games, so they understand. I think the nuances of this type of topic come into play, when you start saying well, should we have a larger strike zone? A hitter may say, well, I don't want a larger strike zone. A pitcher may say, I'd love a larger strike zone. So it sort of becomes what's going to help me be more successful as a player perspective. But I think collectively, Players Association, Major League Baseball, and all of us need to try to do what's right for the game. And so, I think most people that complain about having a clock in baseball are also the same people that lead in the 7th inning. And so what is the right answer? And it's hard to say, but I think both Bill and myself and his father, we're advocates for trying to find a pace of play that draws a younger generation to the game. And it's sort of exciting to sit here and look at this group because it is younger, and it is people that care about the game and want to see our game thrive. And so, for us, we've always been on the side of if more people want to watch the game because we're playing quicker and playing at a better pace, then we're all for it. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mozeliak, how much different is your job now as Vice President of baseball operations
President.
very good.
President.
Oh, sorry.
President.
As president, as compared to GM, what's changed?
You know, I think the biggest thing for me is obviously the role I was in, I basically had done for, 12, 13 years in terms of being in the weeds at sort of every decision that fell under baseball ops. Trying to let Mike Gersh have a little bit more skin in that game. And I think the biggest challenge for me is to sort of pull myself away from that and then try to focus on some of the bigger picture items that are coming on sort of our landscape as both Bill, and myself start to look at where we want to see the club in 2020, 2021, and so forth. So, it hasn't been the easiest transition or as easy as I had hoped, but I feel that's on me, and so I'm, forcing myself to try to be less engaged in some areas and then focus more on sort of the long-term view of the company.
I'm not sure how we made it this far without anyone asking about Jordan Hicks, so I'll do it.
Who's that?
Might have heard of him. He was surprised making the roster out of spring training, but has obviously taken things by storm and really has faced every opportunity that he's been given. What is your take on maybe a little bit of a risk giving him so much responsibility in high leverage situations early, and how you see that translating with him moving forward?
Well, I feel like I could sit here for an hour and talk about Jordan Hicks
I'm okay
because
with
it's. I don't know if everybody would be, but it's just such an interesting thing, right? Because how many times do you promote somebody from A-ball to the big leagues? And not only did he not come directly from A-ball, it actually had a spring training where he was in big league camp, and arguably was demoted to step camp, and then makes 2 appearances the last week of spring training, and all of a sudden now is in the big leagues. I mean, it's a very unique story, very unique road or path to the major leagues. And I think when you try to take a deep dive into that, there's a lot of things you could look at and understand. But I think for me, everybody was why would you take that chance or why would you do it? And for me, it was pretty simple, because when I was talking with Yachty and Mike Matheny that night after that start at the Nationals in spring training, the one thing that Yachty said to me was let me take hold of this wheel, meaning as if I'm going to drive the car, and see what we have. And that was a pretty compelling statement to me, because it was, he knows how to work pitchers to their strengths, get the most out of them. And for me, I felt just this internal confidence that with him behind the wheel, great things could happen. And needless to say, we have. Now, real quickly on this, and I won't talk forever on it, but the sort of the Hicks topic in general, I would imagine some people in this room are a little concerned about strikeout rate, and in terms of is that sustainable? And when you have a guy throwing 101, 102, but yet strikeout rate is not to where it should be, I did take a hard look at Adolis Chapman, because I was just sort of curious to see walk rate, strikeout rate, and how that compared. And I think he has a lower walk rate, which is encouraging, but also a lower strikeout rate. And I think the big difference here is the nuance is he's going to have to learn how to create that swing and miss opportunity for himself. And I think that's where Yachty's going to come into play and be able to cater a strategy to his strengths. And if he does that, this young man has a chance to be very special. Now, final thought on Hicks is, what's he going to be? Because, that always comes up whenever we talk about him. And I don't know that answer. I don't know if he's going to be a starter or a reliever, but I certainly wouldn't want to sit here in early April and tell you I've already know the final chapter, because we don't know what it's going to look like. But I will say, when I was sitting up in Peoria last year and watching him pitch, knew it was something special, and a lot of people, maybe some people in this room even, mocked me for bringing him up this offseason, as Mo just being cheap. But, there was something about him I knew that someday he was going to make an impact. Did it happen sooner than I thought? The answer is yes, but not that much faster. So he's an exciting guy.
As far as even Chapman and Hicks, when they're hitting triple digits normally, could it be more of a defensive type swing where the strikeout rate is lower, where it's we're just trying to get this bat through the zone, where maybe we can get it on the head of the bat if not? I mean, even the ground balls hit yesterday weren't really hard. So could it be more of an offensive approach of I'm just not going to get blown away and I've got to do something here?
You know, it's an excellent point, and one I don't know the answer to because I've never really asked anybody. If you look at like when we were facing Chapman, we were striking out a lot, right? We weren't having a ton of success, so maybe we should have changed our approach. But you know, it's sort of funny bringing up the Chapman thing real quickly. Is that that really kind of helped define Mr. Martinez, because when you think back to Martinez, and I'm talking about Jose Martinez, when he had that pinch hit at bat, when Chapman was pitching for the Reds, and he was the one guy that actually was like, didn't look like he was like overwhelmed. And then subsequently he actually had another at bat the following year against him, and I remember like talking with Matheny, and we're like, this guy's got a chance to be special. And you know, you hate to take like 2 little at bats and say you've got this figured out, but he really has never taken a step back since those at bats. So it's been very impressive.
First off, thank you for having us. You mentioned the glut of catching prospects that you have throughout various levels of minors. Any thoughts on changing positions of any of them, or tinkered with moving them around as a main catcher?
You know, it's sort of interesting when people talk about, you know, conversions or pitching or position changes. I think the one thing you want to caution yourself as, most catchers have more value as a catcher, right? Because most guys are catching because it's a skill, a unique skill. And I think the other thing to think about is where are they offensively? Now, I would argue that, or accept the argument that somebody like a Kinzer could play a different position because he's hitting so well. So he does profile at really anything from an offensive standpoint. So, but I think the simplest way when you sit in my seat is you never want to devalue the asset. And so by starting to move these guys around, I think they're better off becoming great catchers and hoping for that offensive upside than really trying to create. And the other thing to think about, moving someone to first base isn't a big project, right? I mean, like, you know, we can all sit here and say it's seamless and takes nothing more than put you in the lineup and go do it. I mean, there is some work to it, but it's not like taking a first baseman and making him a catcher. So certainly I think these are good problems to have.
Just to circle back, when you compared Hicks and Chapman, one of the big differences between their fastballs, like the spin rate, so Chapman's got the spin rate, which helps his like live high in the zone and kind of ride up. Hicks is way at the lower end, kind of 100 or so, like around Joe Kelly, get more ground ball based. Do you guys have any kind of practices to try to teach guys how to, you know, change spin rates? Either you have a guy that you want to live low in the zone, kind of how to take some off and keep the velocity, or for like Hicks, it might help him if he can bump it up and live higher in the zone and maybe get more swing and miss on his fastball.
You know, it's sort of interesting, right? Because I don't think we try to create a curriculum to what you do. And so in Hicks's case, getting ground balls is something that we're okay with. And if you think about yesterday, it saved us, right? Double play ball. The 2 strikeouts would have been just as fine too. But when you look at understanding what a pitcher's strength is based on spin rate, that's what we're trying to adapt to. In terms of taking that next step and trying to increase someone's spin rate, our hope is and we're going to invest heavily in Jupiter to try to create our own pitching lab where we have the ability to start messing around with this in the off season. That's our goal. And when you're looking at how to do that, I think we have like the right personnel in place to build this curriculum and allow pitchers to maybe move the needle there, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And I would hope this time next year we have bricks and mortar up, pitching labs moving, and we've already seen some small signs of success.
Kind of like a drive line for you guys specifically.
Well, exactly. Like, you know, why do I want to outsource that when we can try to do it internally? And, you know, we have a lot of confidence in the people that understand TrackMan data and how to make the most of it, and that's our goal. Why don't I take one more, and then I'll turn it over to Bill.
As these injuries continue to mount up for Adam Wainwright, any consideration maybe moving him to the bullpen and bringing up someone like a Jack Flaherty, or is Adam Wainwright going to be a starter for as long as he remains to be a starter and physically able to do so?
Well, I think it's a good question, and this is another one of these I think that no one has the perfect answer for, but is a bullpen really easier than being a starter? You know, I think getting up and down, getting hot, there's some level of stress on your body, specifically on your elbow, that comes into play. And, you know, versus if you're pitching every 5th day, what's better for you? And I don't know the answer. I mean, I think we always debate this and we try to act like we know the answer, but I don't really know it, what is best. And I think Waino sees himself as a starter, so I think there's a mental component if all of a sudden we say you're going to the bullpen. The other part is what's the role in the bullpen? And you know, the one thing I think we've done a fairly good job of is creating some real competition and depth. I mean, if we had held this event back in early February and you said, do you think you're going to sign Holland? I'd have been like, no, right? And then, we signed Norris and we were all pretty bullish on that. And there were some people in this room that were advocates for that deal just based on how he pitched, and it was very analytically driven on the same things we were looking at. But there were also some people like, why? Why would you sign him? It was a dumb sign. But you look at between Gregerson, Norris, and Holland, we're going to be a strong bullpen when it comes all said and done. Oh, no one asked about him yet. I was actually hoping to get out of here without that. Now I'm going to have to go on record, damn it. But yeah, it is. It's exciting options. And you brought up Flaherty, who I think we'd all agree that the way he's pitching, he deserves to pitch in the big leagues. But that means someone else doesn't. And I sort of think about this, and I'd say this for this room, excuse me, that these are the tough parts about when you sign someone to a long-term deal, because at some point you're going to see a regression in performance or medical risk becomes higher. And unfortunately, I think that's probably where we are here. Now, the good news is I think we can manage it, and the better news is we do have that depth to solve the problem. So, all exciting. Now, before I leave, I will touch on Reyes, because it is a hot topic, and don't really have to answer this until June 1st. But in the meantime, we might as well think about it. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have him try to come back as a starter for now, and that's how he will go on his rehab, and that's how we'll look at it. Now, I've also said this, and I don't think I'll run from this, is it could be based on need. So depending on what the club looks like, where we are, might dictate how he's going to be used. Here's the good news, peeps, is he's feeling good, he's throwing well, velocity's there, his feel for his off-speed pitches are there, and I think by putting him on the 60, we didn't have to rush anything. We didn't have to all of a sudden make a knee-jerk reaction because of what was happening here. And I think in the end, it was a smart move, and I hope that in the end, he's going to be an exciting person that has real value, whether it's in the rotation or in the bullpen for us. So all good stuff.